even as Donald Trump refuses to give straight answers about where he stands on things like a national abortion ban or contraception. Conservative Christian groups understand what Trump will do for them. I mean, it's not that much of a mystery. And part of their confidence here that an extreme Christian nationalist agenda is very much within their grasp, part of their confidence is because these groups don't have to rely on just Trump alone. They can count on Trump's most powerful ally in the fight for Christian dominion, the conservative majority on the United States Supreme Court. Just this week, we heard Supreme Court Justice Samuel Alito tell a progressive activist that he believes we need to return America to a place of godliness. As Elizabeth Dias and Lisa Lara write in a new analysis for the New York Times, while Justice Alito is hardly openly championing these views, he is embracing language and symbolism that line up with a much broader movement pushing back against the declining power of Christianity as a majority religion in America. The movement's rise has been evident across the country since Mr. Trump lost re-election in 2020. Justice Alito and his fellow conservative justices have already delivered for the Christian right with their Dobbs decision, striking down Roe v. Wade, and soon they will have a chance to do so again. The Supreme Court is about to rule on two major cases of considerable significance to the Christian right. One will determine whether access to the most common form of abortion in this country is significantly restricted or not. And another will determine whether doctors in emergency rooms can deny pregnant women medically necessary abortions. How the court rules on these issues could tell us just how much power the Christian nationalist movement has gained in this country and how close they are to victory. Joining me now are Lisa Lara, the national political correspondent for the New York Times. She is also the author of the new book, The Fall of Roe, The Rise of New America. And with me is Mark Joseph Stern, senior writer who covers the courts and law at Slate Magazine. Thank you both for joining me. Lisa, let me just start with the piece that you have out today in the Times, and where you note an array of conservatives, including anti-abortion activists, church leaders, and conservative state legislators, has openly embraced the idea that American democracy needs to be grounded in Christian values and guarded against the rise of secular culture. I mean, I don't think it's an exaggeration to suggest that that strain of conservatism now seems to dominate the Supreme Court as well. Do you think that's far off?
Look, part of what we document in our book, The Fall of Roe and the Rise of a New America, is that latter part of the title, The Rise of a New America. And what that really is about is the radicalization of conservative Christians. And we've seen some of that coming out of these tapes from the court. But, I wanted to draw your viewers' attention to another story today, which was that the Southern Baptist Convention, which represents, the largest Protestant denomination in the country, 13 million churchgoers, came out and said that they oppose IVF. So this is a fairly radical statement for that group, and we're seeing this kind of return to these Christian conservative cultural values from the churches all the way up to Alito's statements at the court. So I do think what we're watching is this shift in American power. We don't know where it's going to go, but we have a bit of a template for success for this movement, and that, of course, is the fall of Roe and how that network of conservative Christian activists and lawyers were able to take down that legal precedent may be a way that they can then move on to tackle these other things that they are opposed to, like, as we learned today, IVF.
Yeah, I mean, I do. When we talk about shifting the Overton window, moving the goalpost down the field, it feels like the activists on the outside, on the fringes of the far right, are in some ways signaling to the Alitos of the world, okay, this is where we're at. See if you can get here. And Mark, I wonder if you can talk a little bit about Alito's evolution here, because he wasn't always this either explicit or in some ways radicalized when he joined the court. Can you talk a little bit about his progression to where he is now?
Yeah, I think a crude but accurate term to describe Alito is MAGA-pilled. During Donald Trump's rise and presidency, Alito really let his Christian nationalist flag fly and began to embrace not only the rhetoric but also the substance of this far-right Christian supremacy and this idea that Christianity is rooted in the Constitution, that we are a Christian nation, and that courts have some kind of obligation to protect and indeed elevate Christianity above not just other religions, but above secular society. And he went on a little bit of a talking tour earlier this decade where he decried the new moral code of secularism that promoted reproductive freedom and LGBTQ equality, and said that it was an existential threat to Christianity. And all of this is reflected very much in his decisions like one a few years ago where he tried to let pharmacists deny Plan B to patients to whom it was prescribed. Not, any kind of actual abortion drug, but just Plan B. In decisions like Hobby Lobby, where he has allowed corporations to restrict employees' access to birth control under their own health plans. And more recently, and of course, these abortion cases, most notably Dobbs, as Lisa documented, Sam Alito was always going to be the man to write that opinion overruling Roe v. Wade. But in the coming days and weeks, we're going to get these decisions on abortion, especially involving the abortion pill. And I think Alito is quite likely to stick his neck out in that decision and write about how he believes medication abortion is unlawful under existing federal law, under the Comstock Act of 1873. This is a radicalized justice, very much maximizing his impact by staking out the positions that activists in the grassroots want him to take, legitimizing them and shifting the Overton window, and eventually, he hopes, transforming them into the law of the land.
Yeah, I mean, it's quite obvious that the DNA of the Christian conservative warrior class has imprinted itself upon the Supreme Court. But Lisa, when we talk about the relationship in politics between, for example, Donald Trump and his pro-MAGA coalition and the conservative Christian warrior class, I wonder if Trumpism hasn't also imprinted itself on them. I'm just thinking about those two pieces of sound we played, where Donald Trump is in a church, a big church, and the call and response is the word BS. It's a family program, so I'm not going to say the actual word. And Rudy Giuliani is calling Fani Willis, the DA down in Fulton County, one of the most vulgar things you can call a woman, with distinct racist undertones. I mean, this seems to be a new brand of, I guess, Christianity, if you want to call it that, in the age of Trump.
Yeah, look, the church has changed politics, but politics has changed the church, too. And churches, especially conservative, evangelical, and Catholic churches, have grown so much more political. As we show in our book, The Fall of Roe, they made this deal with Donald Trump. He promised them in 2016 in Iowa, Christianity will have power, and conservative Christians jumped on the Trump train, and it ended up being a bullet train for them. They got these 3 justices on the Supreme Court, and the deal was set. And now they've been with him for 8 years, and it doesn't, for conservative Christians, they're with him. He can sort of moderate his tone on abortion, say that he wouldn't sign a 15-week federal ban, and they're still probably going to stick with him. They are fully bought in and part of this MAGA movement, and the two are operating together. Now, Donald Trump is in a different position because the politics of abortion have changed so radically, and he senses the toxicity there, right? Which is why you've seen him come out and say it should be returned to the states, that he supports exceptions to the ban for rape, incest, and life of the mother. So that dance has gotten a little bit more complicated for him politically, but there's not a sense that he's worried about losing this group that's really become a central core of his movement and his base of support.
Well, yeah, and I mean, one wonders where the guardrails are in any of it, right? The Republican Party has effectively pledged fealty to everything Trump represents, Christian warrior class and all. And then on the Supreme Court, Mark, I mean, how much of a counterweight is someone like Chief Justice John Roberts or Brett Kavanaugh? I mean, does even the attempt at counterweighing happen on the Supreme Court?
No, they're a very feeble counterweight when they choose to be one at all. All 3 of Trump's appointees generally vote in lockstep with what the Republican Party wants. Trump has, of course, taken over the party, so it is very much his court. And I think it's really disturbing, especially to look at some of these decisions that do involve extreme circumstances of tragic medical mishaps where women are in dire need of abortion, right? This is one of the big cases this term. States courts are saying these women cannot get abortions, that they have to get sepsis, they have to begin hemorrhaging, they have to be dying before they can get abortions. Well, Republican politicians lined up to agree with those laws and to support those laws at the Supreme Court. You had a ton of Republican state attorneys general and Republican governors lining up to say, we do think women should be forced to the brink of death before they can get emergency abortions. I think the Supreme Court will likely agree with them and continue to force these women into these horrible circumstances. And Trump is savvy enough not to say anything about it because he knows he's got his foot soldiers in the judiciary doing the work for him. He's got his guys on the bench who are ready to uphold the most draconian abortion bans imaginable. And he doesn't have to say anything. And just by remaining silent and not speaking out and condemning these bans, he knows he can keep the Christian right very much on his side. And that is the whole genius of the strategy behind capturing the courts. You get these justices and judges on the bench for decades. They will do your bidding. They will uphold your extreme laws. They will impose your draconian policies. And most people, unfortunately, most voters don't draw those lines between the judges and the presidents who appointed them and the parties that those presidents belong to. And so they keep getting away with this stuff. And that is very much the story of Trumpism in the judiciary.
Yeah, a story where there's no accountability.
Yeah.
Lisa Lehrer and Mark Joseph Stern, thank you both for your time tonight. After the New York Times reported that 2 flags associated with the January 6th insurrection had flown at the homes of Supreme Court Justice Samuel Alito, the justice defended himself last month in a letter by putting the blame squarely on his wife, Martha Ann Alito. I was not familiar with the Appeal to Heaven flag when my wife flew it. I was not aware of any connection between the historic flag and the Stop the Steal movement, and neither was my wife. She did not fly it to associate herself with that or any other group. But audio of Martha Ann Alito, released this week by undercover progressive activist Lauren Windsor, paints a decidedly different picture of Mrs. Alito's flag collection and why she flew them.
You know what I want? I want a Sacred Heart of Jesus flag because I have to look across the lagoon at the Pride flag for the next month.
Exactly.
And he's like, oh, please don't put up a flag. I said, I won't do it because I'm deferring to you. But when you are free of this nonsense, I'm putting it up and I'm going to send them a message every day. Maybe every week I'll be changing the flags. There'll be all kinds. I made a flag in my head. This is how I satisfy myself. I made a flag. It's white and it's yellow and orange flames around it. And in the middle is the word vergogna. Vergogna in Italian means shame.
Joining me now is Emily Baden, the former neighbor of Supreme Court Justice Samuel Alito. Emily, thank you very much for joining us tonight. I'm really eager to hear your reaction to this audio that was released. And we played that specific clip there because it really sounds like Mrs. Alito is intentional when she flies these flags and that there is absolutely a political point of view she is trying to communicate. What did you make of that audio?
Absolutely. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me tonight. It's a pleasure to be here. And to hear her talk about the flags in that way just solidifies what we all know is that they're meant to display a particular message. She mentions the being upset by the Pride flag and wanting to fly a Sacred Heart of Jesus flag. Well, that flag specifically means anti-LGBTQ, anti-Pride. So it's very clear what she's doing with the flag. And that just proves us all right that in his statement, he's lying, where he says, well, we didn't have any reasoning behind it. We don't know what it means, et cetera.
Yeah, well, that she wasn't trying to be part of a movement or group. I mean, I think that's definitely questionable given the fact that she's absolutely flying these flags in response to certain groups. Emily, I got to ask you, because she's so animated when she talks about this flag she'd like to make that says vergogna, which means shame in Italian. It brought back to mind part of your account with the Alitos, where this is, according to the New York Times, when Mrs. Alito confronted you, you said something to her like, how dare you behave this way? You've been harassing us over signs. You represent the highest court in the land. Shame on you. The concept of shame really seems to animate her. And I wonder if you could talk more about your interaction with her when the word shame and the concept of shame was discussed.
Yes. Well, that interaction, the one that happened on February 15th, is the one that they're using as an excuse for why they flew the upside down American flag, which we know doesn't make sense because the flag was up weeks before that. What do I make of it? It's just, it was such an intense interaction, and it was about the third time that this has happened, each time escalating more and more. And yeah, I meant it. Shame on you for behaving this way, because you do represent the highest court in the land. And that was more intended towards him, who was there as well and did not step in.
Can you talk a little bit about the relationship between the Alitos as you saw it? I mean, he was present for some of these interactions, if you want to call that. And I was... There's part of the undercover interview or the undercover audio that we heard where Martha Ann Alito talks about her plan for seeking justice for all that has befallen her and her husband. Let's take a listen to that sound.
It's okay because if they come back to me, I'll get them. I'm going to be liberated, and I'm going to get them. Oh, well, there's a 5-year defamation statute of limitations.
I don't know what you mean by gay, like yeah.
So Martha Ann Alito has a plan here. She's mapped it out, 5-year statute of limitations for defamation. The question is that Justice Alito's plan? And that begs the question, what is the relationship between these two people? Do you think what she says is tacitly endorsed by him, or is that overestimating her import in terms of a family strategy?
Yes. I don't think it's for me or anybody else to say that or to pass any judgment on their relationship. All I witnessed was her, behaving in that way and him not stepping in. And what I really just want to point out is that there's no way that he didn't know those flags were flying at his house. And in those same recordings, in his own words, he is unable to be impartial. He says that there are two sides and one side must win. And he's basically saying that he sits on one side, and he says that he can't negotiate with the other side. He can't split the difference, as he put it. And that is a giant red flag. And at this point, we've moved past the idea of him just accusing, and we've reached the point in the general consensus that it must be removal at this point.
I think we're a ways from that, but I have to ask you, because this is a woman who verbally, there were verbal confrontations. I believe she spat at your car at one point. There's a point in this audio where she says, look at me, I'm German from Germany. My heritage is German. You come after me, I'm going to give it back to you. In the context of these interactions with her, how did you hear that part of the audio?
I think, as most people who heard it, it was absolutely chilling and terrifying that people in such a high position of power are saying such threatening and scary things. Now, I can't presume to know what she meant by that, but I think a lot of people are assuming kind of the same things, and none of it is good. And we really need to do something to hold this court accountable. This is mostly about his inability to be impartial, and that is his bare minimum job description. And he has said on tape that he can't do that.
Emily Baden, at the center of a national controversy. I really appreciate you taking the time to join us tonight. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Still to come this evening, a response to the story we did last night about an apparently coordinated effort to spin a negative story about President Biden across a vast network of local TV stations. Stick around to hear what the network has to say for itself on that. Plus, former Obama advisor Dan Pfeiffer has thoughts on how to take on Republicans like House Speaker Mike Johnson when they try to rewrite reality. That's next.